So last week I was watching one of my favourite creators, Legend of Total War, and he suggested that he had information that the next historical Total War was going to be set in World War I. And for the last week I've been chewing over this, trying to figure out how on earth this is going to happen and how it would affect the gameplay. A World War I setting would dramatically change how Total War is played. It's not a normal conflict, but one that has changed the very nature of warfare itself. And let me just take you through why I don't think this is the best setting for the game, but I want to be proved wrong, so please let me know down in the comments any suggestions you have on my take, because this is just my take, and of course no one's seen the game, no one knows how it's going to be played. So brief history, World War I was fought over 4.5 years, probably saw the most significant shift in warfare style. At the start of the war, units would be in their battalions. They do battalion attacks in columns, in lines, abreast, sort of mimicking Napoleonic style warfare. This didn't last long, of course, because as we know, massed artillery on infantry is never a good thing for the infantry, and massed artillery became dominant in the field of battle. Europe has seen massed artillery before, of course, in Napoleonic wars and later wars, but unlike before, with guns having to be manually sighted, commanders could use the invention of the telephone to call down artillery support indirectly, almost simultaneously, and that changed the whole style of warfare. It's said in the American Civil War that if one side had one set of radios, walkie-talkies, whatever you want to call it, the whole outcome of the war would have changed. People say, oh, what about if they had one machine gun or a few machine guns? And no, it wouldn't have mattered. One set of walkie-talkies would have changed the whole war, and this is what the telephone brought to the battlefield. Now, when an infantry attack happened, you could call down artillery support and they'd be wiped out. So massed ranks of infantry assaulting positions was no longer viable. In fact, when the Americans entered Midway during the war on the Western Front, they were completely taken by surprise by this, because all the European forces had become accustomed to the new style of warfare, and the Americans were still used to being trained in the original style, and they initially took a huge amount of casualties due to heavy machine gun, and they quickly learned that this was a bad idea. It just goes to show that that style of warfare has definitely stopped in the World War I. So warfare changed dramatically. Both sides dug in. The only breakthroughs would see the Allies and Axis powers use new tactics to break the status quo. One of them obviously was tanks, and the second was the German push through with stormtroopers, using elite troops to move around heavily fortified positions and attack weaker positions, leaving the heavily fortified positions for the regular infantry to combat, and that broke the Allies' line. My concern is, how will this be translated into the style of Total War game that we're familiar with now? Because unless I'm missing something, it literally can't be. There's an incredible mod for Napoleon Total War called the Great War Mod, and this blows expectations out of the water when trying to translate Napoleon into a World War I game. But it also shows that how a Total War game with the same current layout and style would not work in the World War I theatre. And if you were to qualify all the problems that that mod has to deal with in that style of warfare into one, it would be the core design of how units perform. Remember, in World War I, units no longer attacked in line formation as there was in Napoleonic wars. Units like stormtroopers, they were very much sent out on their own. They'd be sent out to do the job. Well, that's fine. That's what worked. In battalions of infantry themselves, there'd be separate groups, each performing a different role. Mortars, machine guns, infantry, flamethrowers, grenadiers, all these different parts of a unit. And so you may ask, why not break down those battalions for separate functions? And that would work, I totally agree with you. But the more we do that, the more we break down battalions into direct control, the more we start drifting into men of war territory, because the more you complicate units, the more you separate the different functions of them, the more complex you make it, the less grand scale it becomes. And that's fine if that's what you're going for, but remember, grand scale is what Total War is. You're commanding an army, not a battalion. You're commanding thousands of men as the army commander, not as a battalion commander receiving orders. Now, if that was to change, that's fine, but how close are we going to get to men of war? How close is it going to be to battalion-style attacks with other AI factions, and we're just part of the chain rather than leading the chain? I think it's just going to be too similar to a Men of War style, where we're directing a separate machine gun fire, hiding men behind walls at very specific locations and using your flamethrower to clear buildings. Unfortunately, that's just the style of warfare this is. And so I don't understand how World War I was going to fit into grand strategy unless you have these huge battalion units attacking each other. It doesn't seem to really work. That's what I don't really get. And if you guys have any thoughts in the comments, please let me know, because it's definitely a problem that's going to have to be overcome. What really highlights Total War is scale. You are the whole army commander, as I just said. You're not the battalion commander. You give orders to battalions and they, do your bidding. And that worked well in the ancient style of warfare because that's how all battles were fought. The army commander sends out orders and the orders are translated and the battalions attack. But in World War One, the only order that's given is attack. And they'll go up and they attack. Artillery comes down. There isn't really any cohesion. Battalions soon break up in the trenches in no man's land. Machine guns fire. Infantry get bogged down in trenches. Until you bring in things like tanks and stormtroopers, how much tactical gameplay is there? Just throwing infantry and artillery at one another. It's not really much you can do. That's the actual problem that they had. They were using European Napoleonic style tactics to try and win a modern day war, but those different tactics are so specific that it really doesn't leave much room for anything else. Because World War One was fought on such a different scale to any other war, remember this is millions of men. If we're going to zoom in on the scale, can you truly be expected to believe that your battalion attack, featuring maybe 100 to 1,000 men, really depicts the actual scale of the war? I would struggle to believe that. So getting that out of the way, we come to the real problem, and it's the fact that it's already been done. Yes, with the games I'm about to mention, Creative Assembly would polish it way higher, alright? Obviously, graphics would be great. But how different would the core gameplay be, really? We've seen in games like Pharaoh, for example, the graphics are fantastic most of the time. The campaign map looks gorgeous. I mean, in Troy is probably one of my favorite looking campaign maps, just with the art aesthetic design around the edge of the camp. That's incredibly clever design. But graphics don't sell games anymore. Remember, Pharaoh, terrible core gameplay really let it down. Yes, battles could look amazing, but if the core gameplay isn't there, you're just playing a simulator at the end of the day. It's not really a strategy game. And I say it's already been done. Games like the Great War Western Front, which is RTS and grand strategy. Yes, you can't zoom in all the way, fine, that's okay, but you already have the grand campaign and the battles. The trench warfare style. Yes, it's not the most polished game, it hasn't been kept up to date, but it's still done what this game is supposed to have done, and that is large-scale trench warfare. And it's okay. It's not amazing in some regards, but it's okay. Another game I want to mention is a relatively new one, and that is Rising Front, made by an incredibly small developer. Just released its very own line battle simulator, which in other words is a Total War style battle. Thousands of units on the field, procedurally generated AI battlefield, so it's different every time. AI that utilizes real tactics, artillery, custom fortifications. You can control AI units, but yes, the graphics aren't amazing. Doesn't matter. It looks incredible with scale. But this is from a really small developer compared to CA. I mean, maybe I don't know how many people. I'm just going to say a few people because that's probably correct. They've already done this genre, and we've seen so many games come out recently. After the success of Battlefield 1, they kind of jumped on the World War 1 bandwagon. We've seen all these Verdun games, great games, but people have played them now, and World War 1 I think is falling off a little bit, which is, genres come and go. And we see with the release of Manor later this month, people are desperate for a medieval game. It's the most wishlisted game on Steam, and yet CA are choosing to go and jump on the already broken down bandwagon of World War 1. This would have worked 5 years ago when Battlefield 1 came out, but it's too late now, unless it's incredibly good, which it could be, and I hope it is. But there are some key problems here. How are they going to overcome them? I don't know. And the fact it's already been done just shows how much people have sort of moved on from this genre, I think. So why World War 1? Genuinely, I don't know. I don't know why. People have been asking for all these other genres forever. Just ignore them. It kind of blows my mind, I think. Ignoring people giving you money. I don't understand. But World War 1 itself is focused on, really, honestly, two fronts, east and west. You have other things like Gallipoli, but that's like a one-time invasion. There isn't really anything else that goes on apart from the two fronts that's significant. There are, of course, other small conflicts dotted around the globe, but the war was decided on that front. It wasn't decided in the Indo-Pacific. It was decided on the Western and the Eastern Front. The other problem with World War 1 is that it only lasts 4 years, and so to make that a longer game, you have to go and zoom in on the scale a little bit more. And so are we looking at another Napoleon Total War, where it's just Europe, it's just Egypt, it's just Italy? And I like those games, but I don't personally think that that's where we should be going. People don't want a small grand strategy game, they want a bigger one. If you just focus on the Western Front, you're literally making a carbon copy of the games I've already mentioned. And a game that only focuses on the Western Front can and will become boring and repetitive unless you completely just change everything, which I don't think is going to happen. Games like Rising Front are great because they're World War 1 games that you can control over the top, and yet they're also FPS shooters, you can actually go into the game and play as one of the soldiers, and you can't do that in Total War very often, apart from maybe Shogun 2. And this is why Battlefield 1 is still one of the most highest regarded games ever made, because you get to experience World War I from a first person's perspective, the terror, the insanity of a historical war that no one alive now knows what was like. But just how interesting would it be for an RTS overview of a World War I game, commanding the entire army? And the reason I say this is because aside from control of artillery fire, which we do anyway in Total War games, how much more could you realistically do aside from committing where your infantry goes? You can't realistically control where they shoot at, because otherwise you're starting to drift back into the Napoleonic style of warfare. Yeah, this battalion engage this battalion and they shoot each other for ages. That's just Napoleon. That's not World War I. And so if that happens, you're drifting back into this post-World War style of combat, and that doesn't work. There are lots of ways to make it interesting, but also lots of ways that it could easily become gimmicky, unrealistic and janky. And I want to be surprised if the developers have the time needed to figure this out. They may create a fantastic game, and I really hope they do. I'm not trying to say it's going to be terrible. I really hope it's going to be good. But to accomplish this, they have to change everything Total War is about. It can't be the same engine, really. Let's be honest. It can't be the same style of gameplay. It can't be the same campaign because of trench warfare. You can't just walk around the campaign map. That's literally the whole point of trench warfare. They couldn't break through. So you'd have to have a completely different campaign map. They'd have to square this impossible circle, how units interact with one another in a historical game, without going too in-depth and becoming a scaled-down version of a grand strategy game. So there's lots of different things that they have to consider, and I really hope that they do, because at the end of the day, we already have a World War I game that's Total War, and that's obviously the Great War Mode. And if it's anything like that, why are we even bothering? Because we already have a great game. Yes, it's not realistic to World War I in some ways, but that's okay. It's taking a game that's already Napoleonic and translating it into World War I the best it can. It's got tanks, artillery, it's got fantastic stuff in there. But if it's anything like that game, then there's no point buying it. We may as well just get a free mod. There's no point even trying to make a game similar to that, because we already have it. It's got to change everything. I just don't know how they're going to do it. So please, this is more of me just trying to get my ideas across. I don't really have a solution. That's okay. I want to hear your guys' solutions. Please comment down below, leave a like on this video. Let's start the conversation. See you next time.